Okay, it's time to talk about some specific vessels here. A few things. All of these images have a picture of the arteries and a picture of the veins. And it makes it look like they're basically the same, except that one's red, because we're talking about systemic arteries and veins, and one's blue. And it also gives the impression, because we see the vessels starting off large and becoming smaller, that the flow is always from the heart out. But that's only true for the arteries. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart. In this diagram, the blood is always traveling away from the heart in any of these vessels, any of these arteries. In the veins, where the blood is returning to the heart, the blood is always traveling in this direction, back toward the heart. So it's not just the color that's different, it's also the direction. The other thing that's a little misleading, and it's not really the artist's fault because this is so small, there's no way to draw it, is that there are tiny vessels that are coming off of these vessels to serve all of this tissue. So there are capillaries everywhere in the body, and the blood can literally make a U-turn just about anywhere. So if it's traveling through the artery here and it gets to the upper arm, there will be small vessels here where it can branch off to feed the arm muscles, and then the blood will hop into this corresponding vein and return to the heart. So we can't really draw, or not easily draw, maybe one of you can figure out how to do this. We can't easily draw arteries and veins in the same picture, see them in the same picture. But they are right next to each other, and each one is like a highway, where this is the southbound and this is the northbound. So they're traveling in opposite directions, but they're located right next to each other. And there are capillary beds everywhere throughout the body that allow you to leave the southbound artery, go through the capillary, drop off oxygen, pick up CO2, and get back on the northbound, just like taking an exit to turn around. So we can't see any of the exits or the little villages that we might visit on the way. All we see are the highways, but it's important to remember that there's that step in between. Okay, so arteries and their corresponding veins usually travel together. So just like on a highway, if you're traveling in one direction, you can usually see traffic that's traveling in the other direction right next to you. Um, so the artery and the vein are next to each other, and they share the same name with very few exceptions. So if we learn about the brachial artery here, then we're going to see the brachial vein over here. Okay, there are others that don't share the same names, but for the most part, at least the ones that we're learning, if you're in that part of the body, they're going to have the same name. The other thing to know is that arteries are usually located deeper than veins, or veins are superficial to the arteries. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Arteries carry pressure, high pressure blood. So if you were to accidentally cut an artery, you could lose a lot of blood very quickly. Horror movies love this, when they show somebody with a severed artery and the blood is spurting out, right? You lose blood so quickly there, it can be difficult to survive. If you cut open a vein, it kind of dribbles out because the pressure in our veins is the lowest pressure of any of the vessels. So if you're going to put a vessel close to the surface where it might get hurt, it makes sense to put a vein there. And it makes a lot of sense to keep the arteries deeper where they're protected by more tissue and therefore less likely to be severed. Okay, let's take a look at some of these vessels in more detail. I'm going to move to the next slide because I can't read any of these. They're too small. Some of the vessels, or the vessels that I want you to know, I hope that it's all of them, but I'm not really referring to the list here, are the carotid artery. There's an internal carotid and an external carotid. Both of these bring blood to the brain, oxygen-rich blood to the brain, drop off oxygen, pick up CO2, and then they return to the heart through their corresponding veins. Unfortunately, this is one of the pairs where they do not share the same name. The carotid artery is paired with the jugular vein, which we'll see on the next slide. So that's one that you'll need to know or memorize both of them separately. If we look at the aorta here, coming off the aorta, there are three vessels, typically three vessels. One of them goes to the right side of the body, and this short part of the vessel is called the brachiocephalic trunk. Brachio means arm, cephalic means head. So blood that's in this part of this artery, or blood that's in this artery, is either going to go to the arm or the head. We don't know which yet. So it's brachiocephalic. After it branches, we have the carotid artery going up, which I just discussed, and this vessel here, which is going under the clavicle. And for that reason, it is known as the subclavian, under the clavicle, subclavian. The subclavian artery passes through the armpit region, where it is referred to as the axillary artery. The axillary artery delivers blood into the brachial artery. The brachial artery branches and sends blood either to the radial artery. This is mislabeled in this diagram, incidentally, but remember the radius is always by the thumb. The radial artery or the ulnar artery. It can go either direction, and in fact, you can see there are other vessels here where it could go, but we're not learning those names. And then that blood is brought to a cul-de-sac, a roundabout, if you will, known as the palmar arch. All right. Is that it for this one that I wanted to talk about? I'm not asking you to know any of the vessels that feed the internal organs. As we learn about the different internal organs, we will talk about the vessels that feed them. Being able to identify them on a diagram is not essential. Okay, let's look at those same vessels, or their corresponding veins, rather. So, if we have blood that was delivered to the hand, it's going to enter the venous palmar arch. It can go back either in the radial vein, which is labeled properly, or the ulnar vein. Okay, so you can see that the names are the same based on where they are for the artery and the vein. These go into the brachial vein, among other veins. You'll see that there are several that go through the upper arm. But I'm asking you to learn the brachial vein. It goes into the axillary vein and the subclavian vein. The subclavian vein goes into or combines with the jugular veins to form the brachiocephalic vein, the vein that's returning blood from the arm and the head. Well, I forgot to talk about the other two branches. That's okay, we'll figure it out. Okay, so let's take a look at the vessels that serve the lower body. Okay, first the arteries. Here we have the aorta, the descending aorta coming down. As the descending aorta reaches the level of your hips, it branches, and each one of those branches is called the iliac artery. You may remember when you were learning the bones in the first semester of A&P, that the names of the hip bones were the ilium, ischium, and pubis. So the iliac artery is passing through the ilium. As it leaves the pelvic girdle, it is referred to as the femoral artery. I guess I should use this side where the labels are. The femoral artery. The femoral artery passes through the knee, where it is referred to as the popliteal artery. The popliteal artery leads to the tibial arteries. There's an anterior and a posterior tibial artery. And then into the dorsal-pedal artery, which means the back of the foot. So just like you saw in the hands, there's kind of a roundabout here. So blood that makes it all the way down to the feet, then returns to the heart through the tibial veins, popliteal veins, femoral veins, iliac veins, and then we're in the inferior vena cava. Okay, so those are the vessels you need to know. It's really important to remember the direction that the blood is going, so that if I asked you a question about blood in the femoral artery and where is it going next, your answer would be the iliac. I just said femoral artery. I'm not starting over. If blood's in the femoral vein and I ask you where it's going next, then the answer would be the iliac vein, not the popliteal vein, because blood in veins is returning to the heart. If I asked you the same thing for the femoral artery, where does the blood go next, then the popliteal artery would be the correct answer. Okay.